After the death of Wild Bill Lovett, his widow Anna moved back to Brooklyn. After a brief mourning period, she started romancing one of Bill's lieutenants, Mattie Martin. It was a quick courtship and the couple married on October 18, 1924. Underworld lore tells us that with the demise of Wild Bill, the mantle of leadership of the White Hand Gang fell to Anna's brother Richard Leg Lonergan. According to Anna, the crown really went to Mattie, who co-led with Red Donnelly. One can understand why it was assumed that Lonergan became the leader. He was the next one killed. Plus, he had all the makings of a White Hand leader. Namely, notches on his gun. On September 23, 1920, about 6 months after Dinny Meehan took his fatal nap, Lonergan got into a fight with another hoodlum named Frank Bonanzo. Lonergan and Bonanzo met on the street, and according to the former, Bonanzo drew a gun and started shooting at him. Pegleg wrestled the pistol away and shot his attacker in self-defense. That was good enough for the authorities, and they couldn't prove otherwise, so Lonergan was let go. There wasn't as much gunplay after Lovett was gone. None publicized anyways. It wasn't for lack of weapons. On July 3, 1924, Lonergan was arrested at a house with 4 others. As police were breaking down the front door, several guns were tossed into the backyard. Though he had no weapons, over 3 dozen bullets were found on Lonergan. He ended up getting 6 months for disorderly conduct. The following summer, Lonergan was again arrested for disorderly conduct when a Brooklyn detective riding a streetcar noticed a large crowd loitering on a corner. Stepping off the trolley, the detective found an extremely drunk Lonergan challenging any and all takers to a fist fight. The detective readily accepted. The 2 men went at it and fought up an entire block before the detective got the upper hand. By this time there was such a brouhaha that a squad of cops showed up and Pegleg was marched off to jail. This episode goes to show just how unprofessional the White Hand Gang was. One can't imagine an Oni Madden or Lucky Luciano standing on Broadway soused, challenging any takers to a fist fight and then duking it out with a detective. What cements the White Hand Gang into the pantheon of New York criminality more than anything else is Lonergan's demise. Mafia legend dictates that the erasing of Lonergan was an intricately planned massacre that finally rid the waterfront of Irish racketeers and allowed the Italian mob to move in and take over. But that didn't really come to pass. Here's what is known. Christmas night 1925. Pegleg is in the Lonergan home enjoying a Yuletide dinner with the family. He, his wife Kitty, sister Anna, their mother, and the rest of the family. Then the lights on the tree went out. Pegleg set out to get a battery stating that he would return shortly. The next time Anna saw him was in the morgue. While on his errand, Lonergan hooked up with 5 of his cronies. Neil Ferry, called Needles, James Hart, Aaron Harms, Joe Howard and Patrick Happy Maloney. The sextet cabbed to an Italian restaurant for some serious drinking. Time passed. In the early morning of the 26th, the group piled into a taxi directing the driver to take them to a speakeasy called the Adonis Social Club, which was ran by Italian gangsters. A 2-story structure painted black and yellow, the Adonis was labeled a dump by the press. A family lived on the 2nd floor and the speakeasy took up the 1st. The Adonis was packed with numerous Christmas revelers. Several witnesses claim that the Lonergan party entered noticeably intoxicated and boisterously arguing with each other. One of them claiming that his brother was tough enough to lick the whole lot of them. The others disagreeing. They took a table and ordered drinks. Across the room sat 4 Italian guys. As he had done on numerous past visits, Howard went over to the piano player and started belting out some tunes. Some of the Italian guys let him know that they didn't care for what he was singing. Needles Ferry may have insulted some Irish girls for dancing with Italian men. Ferry was summoned to the table containing the 4 Italian guys. After a few words, a bottle or possibly the butt of a gun crashed into his face and then lead was flying. Howard and Maloney ducked behind the piano. Ferry caught a few fatal bullets as slugs slammed into both Lonergan and Harms before they could even draw. Hart was nipped in the leg and ear. As quick as it started, it was over. Everybody fled. Somebody, assumably Maloney and Howard, grabbed Ferry and dragged him from the club with them. Then, realizing that he was dead, dropped him and ran. All was still for half an hour until a cop walking his beat came up on Ferry. Assuming that he was passed out drunk, the officer tried to arouse him to no effect. Turning his flashlight on, he realized that he was trying to wake a corpse. He followed Ferry's trail of blood back into the rear room of the Adonis where he found Lonergan and Harms. Around this time, Hart was found crawling along the street and passed out. In the hospital he told police that he was standing on the corner when some Christmas revelers shot him from a taxi. Within hours, police learned through the waitress and cigarette girl that Maloney, Howard and Hart were part of the Lonergan party and the trio was picked up. Hart stuck with his story even though Maloney and Howard fessed up that they were all together. Howard was the only one of the Irish who talked. "We got to the Adonis Club by taxi about 3 o'clock, he told police. "We had a few more drinks and I started to sing. One of the men in the room objected to the music and started toward the piano. Then, according to Howard, the lights went out and the shooting started. One thing all the witnesses agreed on was that the lights were out and, conveniently, nobody saw who did the shooting." Within a few days, police picked up 8 Italian guys, all local except for Al Capone, who although from the neighborhood had been living in Chicago for a number of years. Since none of the witnesses could identify the shooters, all men were released. Mob lore dictates that the massacre of Lonergan and his Confederates was a carefully planned execution by Al Capone. The story goes that a white-hander had turned traitor and told mob boss Frankie Yale that Pegleg and the boys were going to raid the club and gun down their Italian rivals. With this knowledge, Yale had Capone set up a welcoming party for the lads from Irishtown. Supposedly, Capone stocked the place with Italian gunmen unknown to the Irish to throw them off, and once the white-handers realized that their enemies weren't on the premises, they relaxed. And when Capone decided the time was right, the lights went out. This doesn't really make sense for a number of reasons. If the white-handers were out to assassinate their rivals, would they get visibly intoxicated beforehand? If they were going to raid enemy territory, they would have driven themselves and left a man at the wheel to make a quick getaway, yet they arrived by taxi. If the plan was to surprise their rivals, they would have entered the club as silently as possible, yet they plotted their way inside hollering amongst themselves. In regards to Capone's plan, how would he have known that if they entered the club and didn't find any enemies that they would have taken seats and attempted to enjoy themselves, even to the point of one of them getting up to sing a few numbers? And would a gang boss like Frankie Yale really plan a massacre at a crony's speakeasy in front of multiple witnesses? Not to mention that other than Capone, all the guys were local and known and some associated with the Adonis. For what it's worth, one of the female witnesses who was a regular at the Adonis stated that the white-handers were actually frequent visitors to the club. "They were welcome," she stated. "Don't ever let anybody tell you differently. There was no bad blood between them." However, she also said that Lonergan and Harms went down together back to back, each firing his gun when both men were killed before they ever got their guns out. Though not as fun as the myth, it appears the Adonis massacre was a spur-of-the-moment shooting and not an elaborate mafia execution. Regardless of how the white-handers came to die, while the police were rounding up suspects, Pegleg was buried from the family house. Detectives who were on hand looking for gangsters came across 2 newspaper photographers who told them that Matty Martin had threatened them with physical violence if they took any pictures. The detectives saw Matty and another man exit the house and confronted them. They found a gun on Matty and hauled him down to the station. Anna missed her brother's funeral because she had to bail her husband out of jail. Packing a gun that day cost Matty 2.5 years. It's been stated that after Martin's imprisonment, no less than 10 men were killed vying for leadership of the gang. The 10th was a guy named Eddie McGuire, who was killed on May 16, 1928. McGuire had the distinction of having the shortest reign. 5 minutes. Supposedly, he had won the crown by a roll of the dice and afterwards was killed by sore losers. Martin, fresh out of prison, was arrested along with Red Donnelly, George Gibson, and James Clifford. All were released. Red Donnelly got his comeuppance on January 28, 1930. While at the docks, he was told that somebody wanted him in the office. When he stepped inside, a gun was jabbed into his ear and the trigger pulled. When he was on the ground, the gun was placed to his temple and he got one more. Matty Martin and 8 others were arrested, but nothing happened. After nearly 10 years, Matty had the job of gang leader all to himself. Poor Anna Lonergan Lovett Martin. More than anyone, she knew what eventually happened to all white-handers. She had to know what was coming for her second husband as well. Her waiting ended on December 14, 1931. What is known for sure is that the shooting took place in a speakeasy half owned by a longtime gang associate known as Dago Tom. There are different versions of what happened. One has it that Matty was standing at the bar when gunmen entered and started blazing away at him. Another has him in a gunfight with the bartender. Most likely, Matty was drinking with his associates George Gibson and James Clifford. One report has it that Martin just fired Gibson from his role as gang controller. This didn't sit well with Gibson and Clifford, and the former let his pistol do the talking. Matty supposedly got his gun out and returned some shots, and the bartender was wounded. Whether he was hit by Martin or the other gunman is unknown. The men fled the speakeasy as Martin stumbled out after them and collapsed. Cops asked the wounded gang leader who shot him. It being close to Christmas, he replied Santa Claus. Even Anna tried to get Matty to talk. "Are you asking me to rat Anna?" he asked surprisingly. He lingered for a few days surrounded by his wife and several detectives, slipping in and out of consciousness. In one lucid moment a detective said, "Matty, we've done our duty. It's up to you now to do yours. Name the man." "Okay," Matty answered. "I'll do my duty. Turn those guys loose." Clifford, Gibson, and Dago Tom were arrested for the shooting. After 2 days, Matty died. Anna stated that he had told her who pulled the trigger but refused to name him because he would just beat the rap anyway. Although she didn't name names, she did tell them, "You have the man." In the end, Anna was right, nothing was done. What do you think? Was the Adonis Club massacre a pre-planned hit, or a spur-of-the-moment shooting? Leave your thoughts in the comments.